Welcome back to TalkNorth.com. Thank you for listening. If you can, please download before you listen. It helps our business. I'd also like to thank our producer, Brandon Morton, and let you know if you'd like to sponsor this program or any of the programs on the network, you can reach me at jsouhan47@gmail.com.
You're listening to the Strom Sports Show.
It is back. The NFL is officially back after a disappointing Thursday night game. Eagles-Falcons, I thought that was pretty underwhelming. The offenses were both average. The Falcons continue to struggle in the red zone. But yeah, you're listening to the Strom Sports Show. I'm Steven Strom on the TalkNorth.com podcast network. Now, I don't want to harp on this too much, but boy, I mean, seeing Nick Foles on Thursday, it's got to make you cringe a little. It's got to make you frustrated, because where was that Nick Foles when he was playing against the Minnesota Vikings? Where was that Nick Foles when he was in the Super Bowl? I mean, it's got to kill you as a Viking fan to see Nick Foles just be completely average. And that's, I mean, quite frankly, the Nick Foles I thought I was going to see in the NFC Championship. Boy, was I wrong. But listen, Viking fans, it's been a long way since that gruesome NFC Championship game, 38-7. I don't want to harp on it. It's felt like a completely long offseason, and now you have the opportunity to open up with a clean slate in 2018. This team has a legitimate championship roster. We can forget about last year. This is the beauty about sports. You can forget about last year because this year is a new year. And I'll tell you, just watching regular season football, it makes me so excited to think that this team has a fresh start, because the last few quarters of playoff football, of Viking football, it doesn't have a good memory for me, and it doesn't have a good memory for you guys as well. So coming up, we're going to have Matt Coller coming on, Vikings reporter. He's going to get us ready for the game today. I cannot wait. I have been waiting for this. You guys have been waiting for this for months now. The OTAs, the training camp, the preseason, it's all a big tease built up for this moment today. The journey begins at 12 o'clock your time, 1 o'clock my time, against the San Francisco 49ers. The journey begins today of trying to get back to the NFC Championship, but winning that game and getting to the Super Bowl. Today it begins, ladies and gentlemen, and I can't wait. Matthew Coller of ESPN 1500 joined me now. He is a Vikings reporter. How are we doing today, Matt?
I'm good. How are you?
Can't wait for Sunday. I'll tell you that. I've been waiting a long time. It's been a long offseason. So let's get into it. Let's first begin with this, because this has kind of been going back and forth with a couple of my buddies. Who has the advantage at quarterback here? You got a veteran in Kirk Cousins, then you got the young gun who's 5-0, Jimmy G.
I don't think that any quarterback who is fairly inexperienced that comes into US Bank Stadium has an advantage. I mean, when we talk about which quarterback you might want for the long term or which one is more talented, then maybe we'd have a much closer debate between Jimmy Garoppolo and Kirk Cousins. But when I look at the quarterbacks who have had to come into US Bank Stadium and face off with Mike Zimmer's defense, with the type of noise that exists in that place, I mean, I've even seen really good quarterbacks, Aaron Rodgers and Drew Brees at times, struggle in US Bank Stadium. So much less going to be easy for somebody like Jimmy Garoppolo to come in there and have success. And so I think when you look at this matchup of, what quarterbacks are able to do at home in domes like Kirk Cousins and the advantage he has here, I think that will play a very big factor in this game and how well Jimmy Garoppolo performs against the Vikings.
Now, there's been a couple of things, even before the game has even started, that's made headline news. Let's start with Jerick McKinnon. He tore his ACL. He's out for the year. How much does the 49ers game plan change now that McKinnon is out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it changes quite a bit because of the amount of money they gave Jerick McKinnon. They did it for a reason, that they wanted him for his versatile skill set. He is an extremely good pass catcher, somebody that you could line up almost anywhere. I remember talking to Jarek about him practicing his route running in the offseason, so he would be prepared to be a slot receiver if they needed, or an outside receiver if they needed. So I would have guessed that he was going to be sort of their rover type of player who lined up in a different place all the time, and it wasn't just a traditional guy back there. So I think that McKinnon, what he did in Minnesota was probably just scratching the surface to what he could potentially do if given the opportunity, and that's why it's so unfortunate what happened to him with the ACL. And I do think that, well, it doesn't completely limit what Kyle Shanahan could do. When you look at when he had his most success in Atlanta, he had two really good running backs in Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman that he used in so many different ways. Now I think because of that, it limits him a little bit. I mean, I don't think it's the death of their offense, but I do think it's a huge blow.
Now let's look at the biggest issue concerning the Vikings. That's the offensive line. I guess there's a confirmation that Brett Jones is going to be the starter Sunday. Can you confirm that?
Yeah, I mean, Kirk Cousins confirmed that for us, so I'm going to go with what he said, which is that in walkthrough that the number one center had been Brett Jones. And, this is a guy is pretty unique. I mean, he was in the CFL and then worked his way into the NFL and has established himself as a starting player. And, as far as it goes for guys that you could bring in at the last minute because you're panicking because of injury, I think Brett Jones is probably the high end of that around the NFL. And I would say the same for George Iloka, but I mean, for getting an offensive lineman in a trade, you see how many teams are super desperate for decent offensive linemen. It actually surprised me that they were able to get someone as good as Brett Jones. I saw a stat the other night that he was the center in the NFL at pass blocking efficiency, which is just, not giving up pressures or QB hits or stats. I mean, that's a darn good guy to be able to bring in here at the last minute. So I think combined with his veteran savvy, he's an intelligent player, that they should be okay at that position, even though Brett Jones is a guy that probably you wouldn't want starting 16 games at center over Pat Elflein, of course. But as far as a fill-in goes, I think he's pretty solid.
Now, left to right, I'm reading Riley Reif, Compton, Jones, Remmers, Hill. First of all, what's the update on Pat Elflein? And when he comes back, who's the odd man out of these five?
I think it's the odd man out is probably Tom Compton, and I would guess that we're going to see Brett Jones move from center over to left guard once Pat Elflein comes back. And it appears that Elflein is on the way back because he has actually been practicing. He wasn't put on the PUP list, and it doesn't appear that it's going to be too long. One of the things they had to do for Pat Elflein that took a long time in training camp is just get his strength back. I mean, this was a guy who, basically couldn't work out in the offseason because he had shoulder surgery and ankle surgery. So it's not like he could just focus on upper body or lower body. I mean, kind of every part of him was broken. So he's now getting back to full strength, and I would guess that he's back when they go to play the Packers in week 2, and if not that, then definitely week 3.
Let's stay with the offensive line here. Let's look at San Francisco real quick. They got Richard Sherman. It's a big acquisition for them. DeFoster Buckner is a superstar at defensive end. Their third overall pick, Solomon Thomas, has looked really good in the preseason. What do you think Clancy Barone is going to do with this offensive line Sunday to give Kirk time or open up holes for Cook?
I mean, first of all, I think that they're going to have to double-team DeForest Buckner quite a bit because he is one of the best at his position in the entire NFL. He is in the top 5 in the number of pressures he created from the middle last year, and that just tells you about his talent level. But, beyond that, I'm interested to see if Solomon Thomas can adjust to being on the inside and what type of pressure he brings up the middle. And I don't see this as a team that has super impressive edge rushers. So the Vikings do catch a break a little bit with that Rashad Hill is going to be able to work himself into the starting right tackle here and get a little experience before they face some of the better defensive lines in the league. So I think this is sort of like a one-man show, and we'll see on Solomon Thomas because he's got to prove himself to be worthy of that top draft pick. As far as protecting Kirk Cousins, I mean, what they really have to do is use different blocking schemes to get the 49ers to think it's a run when it's not. I mean, that's like a classic thing that happens all the time in the NFL, but they really need to focus on it here. And sometimes that might mean having everybody blocked down left, like it's going to be a zone run and then run play action or something like that, to just get everybody moving in different ways and run a lot of screen passes and things like that don't allow the pressure to get on Kirk Cousins as quickly as it might be able to. But I think as far as Week 1 opponents, I respect a lot of what Buckner has done, and I think he's a dangerous player, but I don't think that this is a defense to really be terrified of, especially without Reuben Foster.
Now, there was a couple of surprises for two veterans on this defense, one of them being Brian Roberson and the other one being Terrence Newman. Let's start with Brian Roberson here. Who do you think will emerge as the locker room voice and leader of this team? Because that's kind of what Brian's role was on this team. He was a serviceable guy defensively, but he was really the guy that was that leader in the locker room that every championship team needs.
Yeah, I think that the value of that role for him diminished over the past few years, especially last year. He wasn't as much the locker room voice because he wasn't starting anymore. And I also think that this team just has such incredibly good character to it that it has many rock-solid leaders, and you can kind of go without one if that's what the roster decision calls for. I do think that B-Rob was an important player for a long time. I don't know if Daniil Hunter makes the progress that he does without B-Rob being there to help him out, because there's a culture in this locker room where the veterans pass along what they know to the younger players, and that's one of the reasons we see so much success from the younger players on the Vikings as they go year to year. But as far as losing him, I don't think it's going to hurt the locker room at all now, because I think he had already passed that baton off to other players.
Two more here. Start with the keys to what the Vikings need to do to win this game on Sunday.
Well, that's a sort of a broad brush of things. It's many things that they need to do in order to slow down Jimmy Garoppolo, for one. That's where I start when you just say the keys.
Okay.
This is a guy who won 5 straight games, and I've gone back and watched some of them, and he was darn good. He is super accurate. It's not right to call anybody Tom Brady or anything, but I understand why some people said, he's got a little Brady to him, because he gets the ball out quickly. He's very accurate on short and intermediate routes, and he looks like the type of quarterback to me that can pick a team apart and just, give you a long day by controlling the ball with short and intermediate throws and things like that, and just, be one of those guys who completes 70% of his passes. And you're going up against one of the smartest offensive minds. And so, as far as, key matchups, it's not just Garoppolo versus the defense, but also, the old school Zimmer versus the very modern offense of Kyle Shanahan. And I'm also looking for a lot of the things that Zimmer does to tweak his defense. Is he going to have Anthony Barr pass rush more often off the edge? Is he going to have George Iloka on the field a lot? This is a real matchup of great football minds, and that should make it fun to watch.
Well, I know it's another broad question, but what can't the Vikings do on Sunday in your eyes offensively? Let's start with that first.
I don't mean to give the most obvious answer of all time, but I will anyway. It's just that they can't turn the ball over. Yep. If you were giving me a guess on how their offense performs on Sunday, I'd say it does pretty well, because I don't have a ton of respect for the 49ers defense, and I like the home field advantage for the Vikings a lot. But there's always that element of Cousins' game that you worry about, the fact that he led the league in fumbles over the last 3 years, the fact that he's a double-digit interception guy, and as much as he shows his toughness by hanging in the pocket many times when there's pressure, he also tries to be a hero sometimes, and that results in bad things for him. At least that's what we've seen in Washington, and we'll see if that changes here. So when it comes to Cousins, handling the pressure, not getting too antsy and turning the ball over, and just also handling the nerves of what he's going to go through here. We saw Sam Bradford do it really well when he made his debut and beat Aaron Rodgers at US Bank Stadium. So are we going to see the same thing from Kirk Cousins, or is it going to take a little while for him to adjust to the amount of pressure that goes along with joining a team as good as the Vikings?
I've waited months to ask you. I'm throwing you on the spot, but let's hear the prediction record-wise for this year's Viking team.
I'm going to go 10-6. I think that this team is actually stronger than last year's team overall, but I think that the schedule is much, much harder than it was last season. So that's probably